let's go back. I want you to look into a crystal ball, Mike, and tell me if these are all real, structures, artifacts, what you think might have happened and how they may have gotten there.
Well, the reason that they're artifacts is because whoever was living there is now gone. They've left, they've abandoned.
So you're convinced of that?
I'm convinced of that. What that means is that somebody left for some reason. Somebody was here, somebody was operating on the moon, somebody left.
Mining something.
Mining, doing something, or that was just their base of operations for whatever they were doing here on the Earth.
Yeah.
And you look at human history, and it really doesn't make any sense. The evolution of life on this planet seems to happen just all of a sudden, boom, there's all this life where it didn't exist before. So whatever they were doing, they left, but there seems to be evidence of some sort of solar system-wide cataclysm happening at least a couple of times in our history. And what I suspect that has to do with is that there are missing planets in the solar system. There's one where the asteroid belt is today.
Something blew up there.
Where something blew up or was blown up, and that's pure speculation, but something was there and is not there anymore. And also in the orbit about where Mars is, there should be a planet that is no longer there. And if you look at other solar systems that we're discovering, these exoplanets are discovering, what we're finding is these things called super-Earths. So what we have is a solar system with these gas giants, and then we have the rocky terrestrial planets like Earth and Venus, and Mars is considered one of those, although I think it's a moon,
maybe
not a
Venus.
planet. But what's missing is these super-Earths. So the interesting thing is that these super-Earths would be sort of a transitional planet type between the big gas giants and the traditional Earth-based terrestrial planets, but we don't seem to have those. And they're right about in the orbit where they should be, or at least where they've been observed in other solar systems. So the question is, why don't we have them? What happened to them? And also what we've discovered, or what we think we know, is that they would tend to be extremely unstable. And that might mean that over millions or billions of years, they could go kablooey. And there's 2 or 3 different theories about how that could happen.
Old book called, I think, From the Earth to the Moon, about an ancient civilization on this planet that went to the moon. And that modern astronauts went there and saw this. It's a dramatic story. Very possible.
Yeah, very possible, and I think that's probably what we're actually discovering.
I think that's what happened.
I mean, if you look at NASA again, if you look at the structure, it was basically 3 major secret societies were involved at the very top levels of NASA. When you dig into all those ancient belief systems, all of those 3 secret societies ultimately came to the same conclusion, which is that we're descended from some higher human-like gods that came from the stars, and were here before, and someday are going to return. So you could almost look at the whole Apollo program as an attempt to basically find the proof of that, and go back to the moon, find the artifacts, bring them back, and say, yes, this is true. Yes, we have our proof that we came from the gods, that the gods are really a version of us. And that may be why Neil Armstrong said, it's one small step for man, but one giant leap for mankind. And what he meant was man, and he didn't say a man. People say he said a man. He did not. He said exactly what he meant to say. Man meaning the greater man that exists out here, but mankind, this specific version of the human race, it's a giant leap for us, but it's a small step for them because they've been here before. I think that was the message, really, ultimately.
And it's going to probably happen again. And again.
And again.
And again.
And again, yeah.
Which is fantastic.
There's no question the last couple of missions especially Apollo 17, that they went there looking for technology. They went there looking for artifacts. These were like salvage missions in my mind, and I think they were definitely there to grab this stuff and bring it back. And it's really interesting that we did that, because the Hopi, for instance, and this is one of the things I did in the research for the choice, was they had a legend or a myth that says, if you go to the moon, don't bring anything back because it will upset the balance of the world. So it's a little scary to me, because I think we did find some stuff.
Even moon rocks, we brought them back.
Exactly. It said don't bring anything back, not moon rocks, and certainly not technology. I mean, imagine if we were able to bring back something like, a piece of a robot or a piece of a mechanical device and reverse engineer that. It could really upset the technological balance of our society. And so that's an interesting admonition from the Hopi, and it's one that I hope that we adhered to, but I don't think we did. Not to go back to the Hopi repeatedly, but they talk about the previous world of man that they say was even more advanced than our own world today. So we had higher technology. And when you look at this stuff, when you look at what's on the moon and you look at what's on Mars, it has a familiar feel to it. I mean, as an engineer, I'm an aerospace engineer by trade. As I look at this stuff, it all makes sense structurally. Things are spaced the way they would be spaced if we built them. They look like human architecture.
They're organized.
Yeah, and it looks like human stuff. I mean, there's pyramids that look like our pyramids. There's ziggurats that look like our ziggurats from the Mesopotamia. So it does seem to have a human signature to it. And then, of course, there's the big one, which is the face on Mars, which looks, at least on half of it, to be a human face or a representation of a humanoid face. So why would aliens who didn't look like us build a human face on Mars? That's a really interesting question.
Looks like the head on the Sphinx, doesn't it?
It does look a lot like that, and you know, the interesting thing about the Sphinx is that it's half man, half lion, or it's a lion with the head of a man, and there's this sort of cross breeding that seems to have gone on. And then you look at the face on Mars, and there's work that's been done where you take half of it and flip it over, and one half looks like a human, and one half looks like a lion. So it's almost like you've got a Martian Sphinx there. I think one of the early Russian researchers called it the Martian Sphinx. So definitely there's that association that we have yet to figure out the meaning of.
Let's talk, if we can, Mike, about the moon for a while. We both know Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14 astronaut. And I've asked him specifically if he saw anything unusual on the moon when he was there. I don't think he's holding back. He said he did not. Yet, he's one of the biggest, staunchest believers in alien UFOs, in ET presence on this planet than anybody I know.
Right.
He said, and again, he says, George, I didn't see anything, but I've been told by people higher ups in government and industry, we're being visited. We've been visited. I believe the guy. How about you?
I believe him too, but I think there's you have to take everything the astronauts say with a grain of salt for a couple of reasons. First of all, the majority of them were Freemasons, and this goes back to the dark mission stuff. And what are the Freemasons? They're a secret society, and what membership in that organization demonstrates is that you have an ability to keep a secret. So if there is a secret that is of national importance or even worldwide importance, these are the guys that you would pick to keep a secret because you can test it repeatedly whether they can keep the secrets of the order. That's one idea. The other thing is that it's possible that he simply does not remember, because the fact is, if you look at the transcripts of the astronauts...
How could you not remember?
Well, it's interesting.
Unless...
If you look at the transcripts of the debriefings from the astronauts, what you find is that they can pretty much chapter and verse go through all of the things that they did. You know, at this point I deployed the ALSEP experiment. At this point I did this test or that test. They have a harder time describing how it felt to be there and what they saw there, what the moon looked like. In fact, Buzz Aldrin very famously was doing an interview just kind of like this back on NBC News, and when he was asked what it felt like to be on the moon, he ran out of the room. I mean, he literally got sick to his stomach and ran out. Now, what I found out in the course of doing Dark Mission is that the astronauts were all, quote, hypnotized during their debriefings in order to, quote, help them remember what they had seen. So was it that they were helped to remember
or
were they helped to forget? And this goes to another thing that's really interesting, which is Alan Bean. I don't know if you've ever had Al Bean on.
Never had him on the show.
He'd be a great guy to get. He was a painter before he went to the moon and became a painter after he came back, and he liked to paint self-portraits of himself on the moon, and he would paint them up so that they were this very bland, boring, gray, National Geographic landscape like, you know, we've all seen on the moon. But it never felt right to him, so he kept painting and doing more and more versions, and they got more and more colorful to the point where he finally reached the self-portrait that he really liked. And it was full of pinks, like your tie, purple, greens, blues, all this multicolored stuff that does not look like what we think the moon surface looks like.
He's saying these colors were on the moon?
Those were the colors that felt right to him, but he never actually said, this is what I saw on the lunar surface. Now, the interesting thing is when you take NASA scan photographs or even prints, like there's a lot of people that have original first generation prints, and you scan them in and you amplify the color just a little bit, what you find is that the lunar surface actually has all these colors. It has pinks and blues and purples and lavenders and all these very bizarre, strange colors, which probably has to do with the fact that light is bouncing around above them.
I would think, yeah.
On these,
because we can't see that here.
No, actually, that's not true. Recently, a lot of people have been taking, with ground-based telescopes, been taking pictures of the moon, and they're noticing that there's a lot more color there than they expect. And they're starting to amp the color up, and they're finding that it's all these different multiple colors of the rainbow. Now, there's some interesting theories as to why that is, but I think it goes back to the fact that Alan Bean was never comfortable with the moon looking the way we've told it looked, but he's very comfortable with looking the way we think it might actually look.
So he hasn't done paintings of little spacecraft on the moon?
No, he hasn't done that. He hasn't done that. Although, you know, there are those stories. There's the stories that on Apollo 11 that they landed and Neil Armstrong radioed back on his secret channel that, you know, they're lined up on the edge of the crater, and you think, okay,
looking at us.
Yeah, and you think that's kind of a BS story. But I'll tell you this: I have a friend who worked at NASA at the time, and he said that story was floating around NASA within the hour of them landing on the lunar surface. So if that's the case, that implies to me that maybe there really was a secret transmission like that.
Do you think it scared Aldrin and Armstrong when they were on the moon?
That's a really good question. I certainly, you know, Neil Armstrong is such an enigma. He just never wanted to speak about what he saw.
And Buzz will punch you out.
Yeah, Buzz will punch you out. And, you know, the interesting thing, too, is there's no pictures of Neil Armstrong on the lunar surface except by accident. They're all of Buzz Aldrin. So all these famous Apollo 11 pictures of Buzz coming down the stairs, it's all Buzz.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is, Armstrong was not a Freemason, but Aldrin was a 32nd degree at that time. Now he's the 33rd.
I think Buzz wanted to be the first person on the moon. I think for years it is something that bothered him. I don't think he was very close to Neil Armstrong. These are things I've heard. Great astronaut, Aldrin was. Just a great astronaut. But I think he wanted to be the first. And I think he was a little upset with the fact that they wanted Neil, the civilian, to be able to do that.
Well, you know, and I sometimes wonder if, given the Masonic kind of infiltration of NASA, which is something I've written about, that maybe Neil Armstrong's job, the reason he went out first, was so that he could record the first Freemason on the surface of the moon. You know, that might have been the reason.
Take Buzz's picture.
That might have been the reason. I really don't know. And there was only one camera, and it's really interesting. They were only allowed to take one handheld camera. It was black and white television camera, and then the one handheld color camera. The color TV camera, they were expressly ordered, leave it up in the command module and do not bring it to the surface.
How about that?
Which is weird.
What was it about Mars that fascinated you?
Well, you know, I think anybody who's ever been interested in science fiction or been interested in space has always been fascinated with Mars. I mean, it's always the planet that everybody thinks is the closest to us, the closest to Earth in terms of its size and its possible habitability and all that stuff. And when we were younger, you know, before we found out some things that we recently found out, it was thought of that there was still a possibility that life could exist there. Actually, it turns out there is life there. We'll talk about that in a bit. But you know, it was just always the place that was the most mysterious. And, you know, there's all the great books, the John Carter of Mars series and all that stuff. And Mars is just a place that's been fascinating to us. And all the ancient cultures had really strong beliefs about it. So it's a fascinating place and a place that we've always kind of wanted to go, and luckily we've been there a few times.
In Arabic, isn't Cairo, doesn't that mean Mars?
Cairo literally means, the name Cairo literally means Mars, and there are people that say that the pyramids are aligned with Mars under certain solstice conditions, and of course the Sphinx was at one time painted red and was named, I'm not going to pronounce the Egyptian name, but it was basically named after the Egyptian word for Mars as well at that time. So there's a lot of strange associations between ancient Egypt and perhaps an ancient civilization on Mars.
Well, you look at what I call no coincidences. Cairo being Mars, the face on the Sphinx, which looks much like the face in Cydonia, which we'll talk about. Lots of similarities. These things can't be an accident.
No, they really can't be. And, you know, Mars is a place that has always fascinated us from ancient times, and even in recent times, we thought that we might get signals from Mars. There was back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, both Marconi and Tesla believed that they received intelligent transmissions from Mars. And, you know, these guys were no dummies.
They weren't dummies.
It's popular now to say, oh, they didn't know what they were listening. They were catching signals from the trolleys that were going over the tracks, you know, a while away. But what most people don't know is that this whole thing about Mars and faces actually goes back to the 1920s. And at that time, Marconi's the head of his company, did a luncheon in New York. It was covered by the New York Times. And he said, we've got a couple of oppositions of Mars. An opposition is basically where, because Mars orbit is very elliptical, where it's closer to Earth at closest approach.
A certain point.
Yeah, at a certain point. And there was one coming up in 1924, which was the closest one until 2003, so until just recently.
20-some miles, 20 million miles
34
away,
million miles
like
was the closest approach. But the one in 1921 was one coming up in 22. The guy said, look, it might be an idea now that we have radio to send radio signals to Mars and see if we get an answer back. And he suggested we send some kind of a Morse code, dots and dashes, like with, that would spell out the word tree, and then send them a picture of a tree and dots and dashes and a man and all this kind of stuff. So nothing, as far as we know, was done on that. But then in 1920, so the 1922 opposition came and went, and as far as we know, nothing happened. But then in 1924, the close approach, the 34 million mile approach, the Naval Department asked all the people that are operating radio transmitters and receivers at that time, and there weren't that many, to have a day of radio silence. And what the idea was is that every hour on the hour for about 10 minutes, we would send up these receivers, all the other radio stations would stop transmitting, and we would listen for signals from Mars. We point the antennas at Mars.
On purpose.
On purpose. And what was actually created was a device called the Jenkins radio camera, which is kind of like an early Xerox machine, where it would take these sound impulses and then print them out in sort of the sequence that they came and form a picture. Well, guess what? These two guys that made the Jenkins radio camera got this transmission. What they got back was a series of dots and dashes in a specific repeating pattern. And then above that was a picture of, take a guess, a face. The profile of a humanoid, but not human face.
Much like Cydonia?
Much like the face on Cydonia. But the weird thing is, George, it's a profile, and when you flip it and look at it, you know what it really looks like? It looks like Voldemort from the Harry Potter movies. I mean, flat nose, and it is creepy how much it looks like that. Now, I'm not saying, Voldemort lives on Mars, but certainly there was some...
weird.
It could have been a representation of a Martian of some kind, or it could be that the people that made the Harry Potter movies had seen this and said, that's a good look for our villain. Let's make him look like that. But anyway, the thing that strikes me about it is that you had this very well publicized a lunch event where the Marconi guy talks about doing this. Then you had an opposition in 1922. And I tend to think the Navy must have sent a signal out. And then they decided to have this National Day of Radio Silence to see if they got an answer back. And the weird thing is it looks like it does. They did, and in fact, it's a face. So it brings us again back to this whole thing about Mars and faces.
The face on Mars.
Yeah.
Greg Molinar, Vince DiPietro, people like Richard Hoagland, all of them investigating this face on Mars. We're all disappointed when they got a global surveyor picture, was at it, of the mesa, and it looked like, where's the face?
Yeah.
It's gone. What do you think that thing is?
Well, it's artificial. And the thing is, a lot of those pictures were taken at very bad camera angles. Some would say deliberately bad camera angles. There's at least one image of the face on Mars, the so-called cat box image, that it's been proven by independent researchers that they deliberately de-resed it and made it look as
Right. I mean, there's no comparison.
It looks like nothing, yeah. But then we've had more honest pictures, like from the European Space Agency, more direct overhead views. And what you can see is that the platform, for instance, there's two parallel lines on the sides, hundreds of meters long, absolutely straight, absolutely parallel. The top of the platform is rounded, the bottom is rounded, exactly the same radius. That alone, if you were to see that on the Earth, if you were to see just that part of it, you'd say, that's an artificial structure.
Somebody made that.
We have to go dig that up and see what's there. That doesn't even get into things like the eyeball. There's actually an eyeball there. There's a pupil. There's a tear duct. There's nostrils in the nose. There's portions of a mouth that go through. There's another matching eye socket on the other side. And then when you get into the really high resolution stuff, which I've been looking at lately, down to like, you should be able to see the size of this table kind of stuff. You see places where the structure of the face has actually collapsed, like a roof has caved in, and you can see the scaffolding and structure and bars and things that were used to hold that roof up on the face itself. So there's no question it's artificial, and I think you could prove that about 6 ways from Sunday.
How big is it?
Well, it's about 1.5 miles long and about 1 mile wide.
That's
so
big.
It's a very large object. Definitely intended to be seen from orbit.
Made out of natural structure that was there?
It does not appear to be made out of a natural structure because we've got thermal infrared images, which will tell us about compositions. And what you see is that the left side, this side that's exposed, is something, it appears to be made up of something different than the other side, which is more rock-like.
Okay.
And that's very metallic. And on certain, early morning shots that were done by some of the thermal infrared imagery, you actually can see geometric panels that are lined up with the actual north-south of the face, which is off at an angle, not north-south of the image scan or anything like that. So you can see that it's more metallic and it glows in the dark like metal would.
Oh, wow.
And then this is where you see the collapsed roofs and all these other things. So when you get into the deep details, it looks like a face from far away, looks like a face from close up. I've even heard stories that they've taken people through tours of JPL and they showed them a picture of the face and they say, and of course some people thought this looked like a face, but you can all see it doesn't look like. And then people in the crowd will go, well, I think it looks like a face. So, and it's not pareidoia. There's no such thing.
You can only really see it and make it out by looking at it from above.
From above.
Much like the Nazca lines in Peru.
Yeah.
So what would its purpose be?
Its purpose would be to attract attention, to say, hey, this is the place where you're going to find your destiny. I think literally it was, the whole complex there was built as a monument to us, from our ancestors, for when we reached the point that we could come back and actually look down there again to know that that's where we came from and that's where we should
What
land.
if they knew they were leaving the planet for whatever reason? We'll get into the Tom Van Flandern theory in a second. And so they said, we need to leave we're going to that planet up there called Earth. We need to leave something behind for our youngsters and their kids and their children so that one day they can look at our planet, our homeland, and know where we came from, where our real roots were. Might they have made this structure as just a memorial to the people who lived on Mars who came to planet Earth?
Well, they could have, they would have, I think they did, but it's not just that, it's all the other stuff around it. And remember that all these other very unusual looking objects, there's a 5-sided pentagonal pyramid, it's symmetrical about 2 different axes, and there's little pyramids all over the place. They all have this mathematical arrangement, and that arrangement actually projects a theory of physics which time after time, test after test, has proven out to be a better theory than the current relativity and all that stuff that we have now. So it appeared that it was to impart more than just the fact that they were there, but also that, hey, there's more to this universe, there's more to the universe itself than you actually think. And here's another part where it gets really weird. The whole face on Mars thing in Voldemort is pretty weird. But in the late 1950s, Jack Kirby wrote a comic called The Face on Mars.
Way before we knew anything about this.
Anybody had ever supposedly seen the face on Mars. And it was about an expedition of astronauts that goes to Mars. They discover this human face on Mars, which looks like the face on Mars. And one of the astronauts crawls up into the eyeball and falls in. And when he falls in, he starts to have this vision of the civilization that built it. And this is a civilization of giants, peaceful giants, right out of Sitchin and Anunnaki, the Anunnaki. They had this peaceful civilization. They lived on a planet that Mars appeared to be orbiting another very large planet. And then all of a sudden they were invaded, and these invaders looked like machines. And they had a war with these machines. They eventually had to move underground, and finally the only way that they could end the war was to destroy the planet that the machines came from, which, if you look at the comic, it appears to be right next to them. And that's what completely devastated the surface of Mars, and then required them, apparently, to leave Mars and come to Earth. So the conclusion of the comic book is exactly the scenario you just outlined. And this is in 1958. It said that they couldn't live there anymore. It was devastated, so they had to come to the next best habitable place, which was
And they
the
were
Earth.
lucky it was here. They really were. And in the comic book, is the face looking up?
Yeah, the face is
Same way.
actually the
It's
face.
just the
It's
same
flat.
way.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's just exactly like the face. It's just this part of it, and it's amazing to actually look at this and realize that it was
How did he
created.
know?
I don't know. I mean,
He's dead now, right?
Well, he's dead, but I had heard that he knew people like von Braun and Willy Ley at NASA. I've since been told that's not true. So who asked him to do this? Did he know
it's
Arthur
just
C.
too
Clarke?
similar.
Yeah, and there's no question that it's definitely the story.
The face of Mars, popularly known as the face of Cydonia, is a distinctive feature on the surface of the red planet, located in the Cydonia region. More specifically, It is a figure that resembles a human face. It measures approximately 3 kilometers long by 1.5 kilometers wide and is located 41 degrees 5 minutes north and 9 degrees 50 minutes west. It was photographed for the first time on July 25, 1976, by the space probe Viking 1, which was orbiting the planet. News of this photo caught the attention of the public, and 6 days later a press report was delivered by NASA. For more than a decade, many consider this information to be that of a human face, and many people believe it's a clear depiction of an intelligent alien presence on Mars. It could have been left as a message by an ancient civilization that at one time inhabited the Red Planet. 2 photographs taken by Viking 1 and Viking 2 at different times clearly show a face with human characteristics. From the onset, NASA assured the public it was just an optical illusion. In 1998 and then in 2001, new photographs were released that were taken by the Mars Global Surveyor. And in 2002, another photo was released that was shot by the Mars Odyssey orbiter. The light was different, and the perspective of the photographs left diverse opinions and impressions. NASA scientists ensured the public that the structure was a natural rock formation, and that there was no reason to believe that it could have been built by any alien beings.
Mars is and will remain a mystery until a human being can land on the red planet and explore its surface. However, it will probably be years before documented proof of what we have unveiled on Nuevo is confirmed. Our hope is that our investigation will remain as evidence until what has been presented in our video is proven or disproven.
The first piece of evidence is a photograph taken by the left navigation camera on the Curious rover. In this picture, you can see the shadow of what appears to be a human being leaning over the rover. This is not a trick of light and shadows. You can clearly see the person's hair, his legs, and some kind of pack on his back. Although many discredit this image, there is no convincing explanation for it. The photograph has not been photoshopped or altered in any way. The second piece of evidence is a testimony that was offered by a person who identified himself as part of the team of scientists who participated in the Viking mission. This person claims to have seen 2 people approaching the rover. This testimony was recorded by John Lear, researcher and host of the radio show Coast to Coast.
I used to work at NASA during that time, and handling downlink telemetry, and one night on our video monitors while the little Viking rover was running around, I see 2 men in suits, not necessarily space suits. I mean, they looked protective, but they didn't look like the bulky things that our astronauts use. But they came over the horizon walking towards the Viking Explorer, and our vision got cut off. I didn't see what they did with it or anything else.
They were probably making repairs.
Well, that's why I was wondering if they were our guys or not. Cause
Yeah, they were.
Do you know what kind of suits they wore?
Pardon?
Do you know what kind of suits they wore?
Well, they wouldn't have to wear very much. I mean, the atmosphere is, there's enough atmosphere to walk around without a spacesuit on Mars, same as there is on the moon. I mean, it's like about 15,000 feet on Earth. Now, you can go through a 24-hour acclimatization program on the moon, and you can walk around without a spacesuit. Same thing on Mars. You don't need a spacesuit. If they had one, it was just minimal.
Could intelligent beings be helping us carry out our missions on Mars? It sounds like a science fiction movie. However, the evidence suggests such a possibility. One of the most important pieces of evidence that reveals the likelihood of an intelligent presence on Mars is undoubtedly the photograph taken by the Spirit rover on November 9, 2007 in the Gustav crater. In the panoramic image, the presence of a human figure in the shot is not quite obvious. However, if we zoom in, we can see what appears to be a woman sitting on a hill. This image went unnoticed by NASA scientists. However, after close observation, independent researchers discovered her. Unfortunately, her face is not visible through her hair. She appears to be wearing a dress, and you can see her hands and her feet in the image. By adding a filter and filling in additional detail, we can observe with greater clarity the colors of the dress and her hands and feet. She has an adult body with wide hips. If confirmed, the authenticity of this image would be one of the most important discoveries of our time as we explore planets in our solar system. It is not a stone, and the original photograph was not a setup. And since this is the official image from NASA, it must be real. With a computer program, we have created the image of this woman as a 3D animation, respecting even the smallest detail. Watch and examine it carefully. It has to be a human form, clearly that of a woman. However, it is difficult to believe that any person could survive in such extreme conditions on such a hostile planet. There is practically no oxygen in the Mars atmosphere and no perceivable water. And with extreme temperatures ranging between 20 and 80 degrees below zero in this region where the image was taken, survival would be difficult. This photograph was captured by the Spirit rover and is not an optical illusion. Almost 2 years earlier, in January of 2006, the Spirit rover obtained another very strange image in the Gustav crater. What we see here seems to be an object made of stone that would have been placed one object next to the other. This image also has no conventional explanation, yet it is clear that this object was not formed naturally. Who or what made it? And why does this room exist? There are many unanswered questions on Mars, and surely the most important query would be, why weren't these two objects investigated further? Why didn't the Spirit rover, which wasn't far from this place, return to take new images? The possibility of having confirmed an intelligent presence on Mars would undoubtedly justify any effort by the scientists who were controlling the Spirit rover. Could a human being survive on Mars? According to the information available, it would be difficult since the availability of oxygen is practically non-existent. However, we already know that there is some water present there, and we know that the soil is fertile for plant growth. We also know that temperatures during the day are similar to those on Earth. But no one really knows if we could survive underground. We'll only be able to answer those questions when human beings land on Mars and can explore its surface in person. In other released images, we can view objects or ships flying over the surface of Mars, objects that have no predictable explanation. These photographs of a dish-shaped object were captured in July of 2014. In another photo, here cylindrical objects or ships, such as in the sequence, were taken by the Curiosity rover on April 28, 2014.
So, Billy, you're looking at a lot of the anomalies that have been found from the NASA photos, and talk about some of the discoveries you've seen on different planets, whether it be Mars, Venus, even Pluto. You're saying that you found anomalies with your anomaly hunters, right?
Yes, we found anomalies. I'm part of the United Family of Anomaly Hunters. We've literally downloaded over 1 million images now, the whole group of us, and we've picked out about 50,000 total anomalies. The majority of them are on Mars because we have the most data from Mars. These anomalies, what is an anomaly? An anomaly is an out-of-place object, something that shows geometry, something that almost appears to be like a biological organism, or something that's out of place. And how we do this, we pull down raw data directly from the European Space Agency server, NASA servers, and the Indian Space Agency servers, and we actually pull them down into our computers. We magnify them. We literally get out magnifying glasses and go inch by inch, sometimes millimeter by millimeter, looking at these images. When we spot something, okay, we see this rock outcropping here. This particular object doesn't match this outcropping. We pull them in and we really analyze them in detail. We open them up in Photoshop, where we take a better look and we take away some of the haze, some of the false fudging that's been put over them. And once we do that, we see what's there. If we vote on it and say, okay, this is definitely something that's there, then we put it out on our site and we say, look, here's another anomaly that we discovered, something that's out of place. We can't specifically tell you this is what it is, but we can tell you that, look, this is an out of place object and it doesn't belong in here. It's not something that we believe is naturally formed by nature.
Mm-hmm. And so what are some of the things that appear to be, as far as...
A lot of structures. We've seen structures on Mercury. People say, oh, Mercury, you can't have anything. Mercury is now, the Mercury Messenger mission has revealed that Mercury has 47% oxygen, argon gases, hydrogen, everything else. You can literally pop your helmet off when you land on Mercury and take a deep breath. The temperature isn't molten lead like everybody thought. Only at the equator it's extremely hot, but towards the poles, you actually get a normalized temperature because Mercury takes 61 days to spin on its own axis. So most of the planet's never in the direct sunlight. We found structures there, structure after structure after structure. And these structures, one of the biggest ones that I discovered, made the international news. It's this one building that appears to be almost a mile long. And you can use a measuring tool to tell how big this structure is. And it's backed up to a canal or a lake. And again, it's already been revealed publicly that there are billions of tons of water and gases on Mercury, so it's not even a secret anymore. Venus as well, we've discovered what appear to be structures, massive structures, which appear to be intact, which is very bizarre, because if it's an ancient society, why are these things, on Earth, if something is here and you go back and look at it in 1,000 years, it looks pretty, destroyed or fallen apart or demolished, but a lot of these structures appear to be completely intact. Mars, you can find destroyed structures everywhere. You can find remnants of ancient civilizations and cities. And a lot of what appear to be different types of machines directly on the surface, just laying there. But the majority of Mars has been washed over. You can see where it had a global flood, and a lot of the stuff has been destroyed. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the moons that orbit Saturn and Jupiter as well have evidence of pyramids. All of these, by the way, have pyramids. Pyramids on our moon, pyramids on Mercury, pyramids on Venus, all the way across the whole solar system.
We actually have now questions coming in from some of our viewers. So Sarah from Texas asked a really interesting question about the dark side of the moon, that basically she's seen hundreds of small pyramids, according to some of the photographs. Mm-hmm. And one of the theories is that, John Lear has pointed out the idea that there's a soul machine, essentially, or some kind of, the pyramids in some form suck in all the energy that tries to pass off this planet. Do you think that this is what's going on, as far as, is there a matrix that's kind of keeping souls here to keep reincarnating, to keep living through an existence, and basically for a set period of time?
That's a very interesting concept. I'm not 100% sure of that theory. I do know that the Clementine mission went and took pictures of the backside of the moon. I hate to call it the dark side of the moon, because there is no dark side of the moon. That's another term that's kind of thrown around that tricks people into thinking that one side's always dark and one side's not. The moon rotates on its own axis. It's in a tidal locked orbit with the Earth, so we only get to see one side. Mm-hmm. But on that side of the moon, the Clementine mission took a lot of interesting photos, and a lot of anomalies are on that side of the moon. There's a lot of what appear to be craters with pyramids inside the craters. And I'm talking about dozens and dozens and dozens of them. Now, I'm not 100% sure if they are attached to this thing that the Anunnaki talk about, which they talk about taking the soul of a human being and encapsulating it and keeping it regenerating on this planet as a slave. I'm not sure if that connects directly with those pyramids or not. I can't really say, but I can tell you this. I had a meeting with Major Ed Dames in October of this year, where he talked about a black pyramid on the backside of the moon that actually is not owned by us, that it's actually functional. But this black pyramid, black meaning the color black, actually, there was a nuclear experiment in the desert somewhere in Mesopotamia or somewhere in the Middle East, and it was a fail. They didn't bury it deep enough. And he claimed that this black pyramid disappeared from there, reappeared over this failed nuclear experiment, and sucked up the radiation and then disappeared from there and went back to the backside of the moon. This is a claim, obviously, that he's made, but it's very interesting that she says maybe it has something to do with absorbing the souls, because the Anunnaki do talk about that. I just don't know if there's a direct correlation with that and the anomalies on the backside of the moon.
But the point is that we are reincarnating here for a certain period of time. And is there any purpose in your mind towards what humans are meant to achieve while they're in this incarnation process?
I think that there's different levels, and I think certain people actually have volunteered to come here to help and assist with mankind's ascension to a higher dimension, because some have broke free and realized what's going on and have come back to try to assist and aid. I call them Jedis, D-J-E-D-I, and then we have some people here that are just reincarnating over and over again and don't really realize what's going on, and they're looking for this assistance, looking for this help, and those people are coming to us and coming to shows like this and coming, to Gaia and other places and seeking knowledge and truth, trying to find ways to really consciously transform themselves. And I think there's also soulless avatars that are part of the actual Matrix programming, in my personal opinion, that are here to try to keep everybody boxed in. So I think it's a combination of a lot of things going on all at once.
Yeah, so basically in zero-point energy and these theories that you're working with, are you looking to certain theorists? I would think of like Tesla, for example, or even potentially like wormhole or Stargate technology, which has been talked about in the ancient past. So, are you looking to the more recent past or to the ancient past?
We actually have gone ancient, super ancient, all the way back to the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita, which are some ancient Indian texts. And there they talk about Vimanas. And then these Vimanas were talked about and written about that actually had Mercury engines and were able to levitate and fly silently across the land and transport the kings and elites from place to place. So we actually looked into that and said, could this be possibly real? And the more we looked into it, the more we found that it could potentially be very, very real theoretically. So we started experimenting with different concepts of using mercury because that's what they used. And mercury is a ferrofluid. It's actually a liquid metal. So we discovered that by putting this liquid metal into a torus, which is a steel torus with a reverse magnetic field inside of it, to keep the actual fluid from the ferrofluid from touching the inside. And then you actually can bring it up to a rotation, to an RPM of about 50,000. Once you do that, and then pressurize that torus to about 250,000 pressures, you then get this amazing anti-gravity bubble. And you don't get complete anti-gravity, but you do get to reduce the weight of an object. With anything within the range of that torus field will be reduced by up to 70%, the weight, the mass. So these are some of the theories that we're experimenting with, and we're very excited about it because it really looks like we'll be able to provide something that could potentially provide an anti-gravity or reduce the mass of an object.
So you see these companies that are basically working to privatize the space endeavors, companies like SpaceX and Virgin Galactic. Do you think that this is ultimately a benefit for mankind's initiative towards traveling towards space, or will these companies ultimately just privatize the gains and basically keep them secret from the public?
It's going to work a little bit both ways. Some of the technology and some of the discoveries will be provided to the general population or the citizens of this planet, but not the really big ones. And I think, and I can't say this for sure, but I think that's in part because they've probably signed agreements with the military-industrial complex, NASA, or whoever it is, the bigger organization, to keep some of the bigger discoveries top secret, because it's got to go through a filter first. They just can't go out there and say, look, we found this entire civilization with all this technology laying around. Look, everybody, it's going to go through a step-by-step process, and then the powers that be will then decide who gets access to what, who gets a chance to see what. Overall, the private industries will profit significantly from this, and I think that the citizens of the world will be spoon-fed a little bit at a time.
So why is it that the government, over the past few years, especially under Obama, for example, they cut back on NASA's manned endeavors towards space, for example? What is the motivation to cut back on NASA, which does seem to have been a tremendous initiative for a lot of what we know as far as the probes of space and whatnot, but also it seems that there is sort of a deep cover element within NASA as well. So do you think NASA is ultimately losing power and they're transferring more of a role to the private companies, or is NASA still a prominent component in the entire endeavor to understand space?
Well, that's a very good question. Now, what's happening is NASA is a front for a much bigger program, the SSP, or the Secret Space Program. And what NASA is planning to do basically is they're going to continue to progress through private space, because through private space you can actually cover a lot more things up. When you're a public or public access type of company, or a company run by the government, then people can put in Freedom of Information Acts. They can request information. They can say, hey, where are our dollars are going here? What's going on? We need to see what you're doing. This is why NASA releases those images from Mars and Venus and Mercury and all these other planets we go to, because they have to. But if it was done by a private space industry, they wouldn't have to release anything. So through private space, you can keep things a lot more secret, because you bypass the whole government objective, and you bypass the citizens, really. So you can really get a lot more things done behind the scenes than you can by staying public.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think is the ultimate, let's say, purpose or destiny of man when it comes to space travel? Do you think that humans will ultimately be going and colonizing Mars in the coming millennia, for example, or do you think that ultimately it will basically space travel will be secured for a small elite group that perhaps are even traveling in space, in your opinion?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that the biggest objective overall for space travel is to secure the human race. Unfortunately, it's a very small list of people that are allowed to get access to these breakaway civilizations. And I really do believe that there probably are multiple breakaway civilizations right now and expanding. And I think that they're looking for specific types of genetic makeups, people with different types of abilities, whether it be technology, whether it be sciences, whether it be even construction. So I think that there's a very small, hand-picked group of people that are going to these breakaway civilizations and starting these infrastructures. And I think that overall, in general, the general population, for the most, might not even never know about it, or maybe many centuries down the road will then eventually have free access to go back and forth. But I think initially it's going to be kept to the elites.
Absolutely. Fascinating interview. Thank you so much for your time, Billy. Really appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.